I think we read or listened to, depending on what you're all doing, the first through end of chapter 3 is what the assignment was. Hopefully everybody did get through it. And so I guess the first introduction, I guess, and the thing was the same author that we listened to with the tax-free wealth strategies. So hopefully it is kind of a building block is what I was hoping for from the initial conversations that he kind of opened everything up to with that first book, focusing more on the investment side of everything. It's all taxes related to, which we'll see how my feeling is on that. And I think, David, you may get the most out of this book because so far, at least, and skipping over the introductory information to some extent, just because I think it was kind of more of the background on the author, which we talked about, and some of just the general concepts that we had talked about from that last book. Does anybody have anything they want to add from the prelogue? Is that the right word, prelogue? And the introduction stuff before we kind of get into the nitty gritty of chapter 1?
Yeah, it was pretty similar to the previous book. It was a little deja vu in a way of similar introduction, similar recommendation, but it was a good reminder of who the author was.
So, I would say this author does a very good job at making taxes not so bleh. I don't really know a better way to say it. Because, and it's funny because I've been talking with a couple of other like CPAs that I've worked with, and a couple of other colleagues and whatnot, and a lot of them have, some of them do tax, some of them don't, and so the ones that don't, a lot of their complaints are mostly around how confusing it is, and it's just kind of boring. And so half of me's starting to recommend a lot of books to some of them. But honestly, it kind of makes it a little less scary, like getting into, and it's actually starting to get a little exciting to me. But I don't know if it's just this artist or just this guy specifically, or what it is. Maybe now I'm just starting to understand it more overall, and I'm getting excited about it. But
I definitely I agree with you in the sense of it takes a little bit of the dryness of reading code sections. It's kind of also, from my perspective, whether I'm reading municipal code or OC or Georgia code sections, the statutory information is very dry, and it is tough to kind of get through sometimes. Like, oh, this just sucks. But adding the conversational pieces to it, the real world examples that he kind of pulls into it, and the little back end stories when he's talking about these, the IRC code section, which is very boring, but how that kind of relates and kind of the back and forth that he adds to it. I agree. I mean, it's a nice little piece that makes it a little bit more user friendly, even for people that don't want to get directly involved on the tax side like you, David, but more just having a better understanding and be able to at least open conversations with their service providers. So, okay. Anybody else, any comments or anything as far as the initial opening salvo, I guess? No? Okay. So moving on to chapter 1, kind of calling it partner, or the author calls it partnering with the government, which is another way of, the way he kind of talks about tax is always interesting. The tax code itself is don't worry about what you have to pay, worry about all the other things that are kind of going on to it, and the incentives that is built into it when you're living your kind of financial life. Look at the roadmap that the IRS or the government has provided to it is a nice way of doing it. And kind of the same thing, the way the title is partnering with, partner with the government. You're not following their rules. They're not your dictator. They're not telling you what to do. They're making it as a cooperative. So even just that whole concept of it, I thought was a nice, again, taking the, man, does he take the edge off taxes? For sure. And that is definitely a nice feeling that I'm getting as I read more and more about his books. Obviously the first one we're talking about in chapter 1 is really kind of setting the stage for the entire book as well, and kind of really allocating really what we're going to go. I would say it's more of an introduction to some extent, but is definitely a full chapter on it. the three characterizations as far as the object of the games, if you will, the rules of the game. One, partner with the government. They're your partner in this thing, and figure out how to work together, kind of the common goal of keeping all your money for yourself and also the betterment of society. If you want to kind of have some altruistic needs here, ultimately we are kind of dealing with some of the other things that the government is doing. It is for society. It is, yes, somewhat selfish to keeping your own money, which is a nice thing, but all the things that they're doing is kind of bettering the society. With the role of government is, better society. So kind of keep that in mind. The partner with the government, understanding the rules and play by the rules, which is the bigger key. Everybody here is okay, pay taxes. That's not the rule. There's so much more to it. Understand them and play by the rules. Again, they kind of made it very clear that we're not looking for loopholes. We're not looking for gray areas. We're looking for the black and white. Here's kind of what to do, and here's how you don't pay taxes. You don't need to bend. You don't need to lie. You don't need to cheat. Just follow the rules, and you'll get to the zero number just as quickly, and probably a little more securely. Understand the rules, play by the rules. And then again, the same thing is kind of to build wealth, not to defer, not to reduce. Basically, the goal is all to eliminate taxes. So partner with the government, understand the rules, and figure out how to build your wealth so you don't ever have to pay taxes on that wealth that you're created. Any comments on the three rules that at least that I got? I'm not sure there's something else in there that I may have missed. I'm not. Yeah, I don't know. I'm probably a little bit later. I probably should have spent probably another day or two doing some of the reviews, so I do apologize. So, any comments on the three rules?
So, from the perspective of like partnering with the government, when he explained it, kind of going through it, it almost makes it a little easier to plan, right? If you kind of think about the government as like your partner, right? Because I feel like it's kind of easier, at least for me, to plan for, okay, if you're partnered with somebody, what is that split going to look like at the end of the year? Well, don't forget your third partner, or that other partner, the IRS, because they're going to want a percentage. It's nice to kind of know that up front, right? And that's now it's almost like it's almost like a good way of explaining to clients, okay, well, you want to do this because you got to remember your other partner, right? Your partner's going to want 10, 20, 30% unless you're doing the things that your partner really wants you to do, right? If you're going against your partner, I mean, by all means, that's fine. But as your accountant, I'm going to tell you that's not going to be very favorable. It's going to stuck, right? But I don't know, kind of going through this, it really it kind of gives me some thoughts on kind of how to explain it a little easier, because I think right now, sure, I'm starting to grasp a lot of the stuff that he's, kind of laying down. But if you were to tell me to turn around, like, hey, David, can you explain to me what he said? I'd be like, you can read it again. So, but that's kind of how I've been feeling about it. And I almost appreciate, especially nowadays, kind of like, whether it's the three rules or whether it's just, the same kind of like, you can almost systemize that, right? Those same three rules, as long as you're looking at those same three rules for every situation, it kind of helps you, kind of helps guide you during your entrepreneur journey.
So I actually really like his perspective. I feel like the last book we read made the government feel very dictatorship, whereas I feel like this book makes it feel not as threatening or not as scary to work with the government on your taxes. And I like the equation that he gives us. It was like a 90-10 split or something. Like, we're responsible for 90% of the cost, but then the government takes on 1% of that or 10% of that or whatever it was, as far as the tax break goes. And so the first book we read, it was like, okay, why is the government wanting this, or why, like this to me just gave it a better definition as to why the government would do and give the tax breaks. And the way he explained, like the housing and the research and development and the 7 different areas of life that you can kind of get those tax breaks in, it felt it just felt better that I think the way he described how the government works through taxes, because, you know, to your point, it is a partnership, right? And David, to your point, knowing what we can keep in our pockets by doing XYZ at the beginning makes it easier to allocate that money to something that it's going to be beneficial to in the long run. Whereas like right now, when we do taxes, it's like at the end of the year, it's like, oh, here's $10,000, or oh, we're taking $10,000. Like it's crazy. But I think understanding where the government wants us putting money in and that kind of stuff will allow us to make better decisions on the back end. And I really liked how he described it as the partnership as opposed to obeying or listening to the government like the last book described it. The last book just kept, you know, well, if you behave the way the government wants you to, well, no, the government just is not really behaving the way the government wants you to. It's more partnering with the government to doing the tasks and the jobs and the whatever it is that they want. And they do take on some financial responsibility, right? It gave the government, I think, some ownership and the responsibility of the financials, and talked a little bit about what they're losing, in essence, by losing those taxes and what we're gaining. So I really liked that perspective and how he explained everything in this chapter. It just made this process feel better.
Less intimidating.
Right.
Yeah, no, for sure, Laura, and kind of playing what you just kind of brought up. You know, that's kind of what I got. You know, this chapter one really kind of lays out the whole thing for the entire book, and for each subsequent chapter that comes after it, right? So the kind of the three different main characterizations: you know, partner with the government, understand the rules, build wealth, and don't pay tax, right? You know, how are we doing that, or why are we doing that? I got five things of why the government does all this stuff, right? I got, you know, keeping the peace, protecting the people, feeding the people, sheltering the people, and educate the people, right? So those five categories that's your government. That's, I guess, society's goal, right? I mean, all those things are all society things that betterment of society, keeping, you know, food, shelter, water, you know, all that good stuff falls within that. And that's kind of the parameters that the rest of the tax code comes down to, right? So in doing that, when you're looking for different things, those are the five, in my opinion, key positions that we're looking for as far as what is the benefit? Like, why does the government do all this stuff? Like, why do they got tax benefits, right? If they can just have a tax law that says pay 10%, 20%, 30%, right? Because it's falling short, and it's providing capital to the government, but you know, what's the point of that, right? So I thought those five different things was a nice little, you know, tie in as far as why are we doing this? Like, what's the government's interest in that, other than just kind of, you know, their interest is not giving money to people, right? But these are the interests that I've kind of come across. Any thoughts on that stuff? Relatively straightforward.
He talks about development costs a little bit in this, and this is something I've actually been researching a lot lately. R&D, like what all is considered in R&D, and so it's very interesting. So I you know, you guys have heard of the depreciation that he kind of talks about, and the magic of the depreciation. Well, with oh darn it, with the research and development, so they have a different type of benefit, but then you can also amortize it, whatever you don't have, whatever you can't get the first benefit from, you can like amortize it over time. So it's like, it's interesting, and the reason I mention that is because I've for a while been kind of looking at a couple of like software ideas, and so as far as developing them, I've just never done it because I know the cost of it and it's a lot, and I don't really want to pay it yet. But now I'm starting to realize, well, now that I think about it, that's actually a research and development cost. And so now it's like, okay, well, now I can go and see if there's any other funding related to it, any grants, you know, depending on the idea. And so it's like, it almost makes it a little easier to kind of think through those types of things, right? So it's like, you know, planning for a business doesn't have to just be, you know, the structure of the entity, what you're going to do. You know, I feel like adding the tax part to it, it's starting to make a little bit more sense. And so just on that, it's like, okay, well, I don't know, maybe in the next 5 years, I could actually see myself launching a software company and actually knowing what to do about it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's and some of the nitty gritty on it as far, yes, R&D, great idea to invest and reinvest some capital. Sure, it's an expense to in my head, passive. Well, if I had to buy software, it's an expense. It comes off the top. But that's my uneducated knowing all the rules, right? I don't understand all the rules, so to play by them, great. Well, I think you had mentioned it, and I don't remember the exact details, but it was almost where with the R&D piece, I think he referenced, and my biggest issue when we're doing any of these books, whether I'm today leading or we're kind of just having just the general conversations, I can't remember what chapter it is, like some of the stuff.
Yeah.
Like, is this chapter 1, 2, or 3? I don't know. So if we jump, and honestly, I couldn't care less. I mean, obviously we got through three chapters, but because I can't. Your comment about the software, he definitely he brought up his own software, right? He invested like $400,000 in building a software thing on there, and I couldn't remember which part he was talking about, whether it's chapter 1 or chapters 2 or 3 that he starts, or maybe even chapter 1 that he started talking about it with just in general. I think there's a component of not only an expense, which is a 1-to-1 ratio, but certain things you get like a 1-to-4 ratio. So if you spend $1 in R&D, you actually get $4 back as tax credits or tax exemptions. So it's not a straight 1-to-1, which I thought was very interesting. I had no idea. Like, man, you really need to have a good tax professional who understands. Oh yeah, reinvest in your business, but how and why and which particular pieces to invest, and make sure you are fully capturing all whether it's the deduction or whether it is a credit or whatever the case may be, and making sure you're getting both ends of that spectrum, not just doing a 1-to-1 ratio on it, for sure. So yeah, I thought that was a nice little add on there, a little bit on the weeds for me, because he starts getting into the specific code sections and how all that stuff works, which is it is tough when we're all running our own businesses, and David, you're somewhat lucky on this one because it is in your business, right? In that sense, it is more for me. This is just great education, and so I can hire people like yourself to. And I could talk educationally about them and make sure, and also know when I'm not getting good service, right? Wait, my accountant never talk about any of this stuff. Maybe I have the wrong accountant, right? I know I don't know about it, but I should be hearing about some of this stuff, type situation. So for sure, and I'm probably going to break the rules here a little bit. So chapter 1 is kind of a very overall discussion of all the things that we're doing throughout the rest of the book. Chapter 2 goes into the specific categories. So at the end of chapter 1, we talk about the 7 categories of investments, right? We have investments that are going to have tax favorable results. So what is the government encouraging you to partner with them on, right? Getting business or investing in businesses, investing in technology, investing in real estate, invest in energy, invest in agriculture, invest in insurance, and invest in retirement. So those are the 7 categories of broad types of investments that the government thinks is great. So if you partner with us in those categories, where you're going to get some benefit on it. Chapter 2 is talking about investing in business. Chapter 3 is talking about investing in technology and R&D. And I think that's maybe where his 400K, came into that R&D, research and development part of that situation. So ultimately, I'm gonna try not to worry about what chapter we're in, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
And just talk about what we learned up to the first 3 chapters, right? So, chapter 2, obviously investing in the businesses. I got a lot of it in regards to, employee ERC, employee retention credits and stuff like that, investing, reinvesting dollars within that business. And what I didn't like about that, I think Laura's going to agree with me on this one. She had made a comment earlier today, and I kind of agree with. I wish it was based on the U.S. only. I think it's very, very good and very, great for the author for having all this other things that he's talking about. If you live in the UK, you live in India, you live in where other countries that you're living in, Canada, Mexico, whatever. So there are things you should be concerned about. But no offense, I don't live in Mexico. I don't live in Canada. I couldn't care about the United Kingdoms and the royal treasury. So he gets into all these details of ours. It works here, it doesn't work here. Da, da, da. I'm like, I couldn't give. I mean, I live in the U.S. Give me the U.S. information, how it works primarily for this much. But the chapters, 2 and 3, definitely, I felt like a quarter of the chapter, if not a third of the chapter, was him just kind of going through all the different states and what he's talked about in this for those specific categories. Anybody other than employee situations, anybody pick up anything from like the chapter 2-ish time frame as far as investing in business and what are some opportunities? R&D is business too, but I guess this is the business structure and what he was talking about in that second chapter. Any thoughts on that?
So I guess one thing that I actually was finding interesting about the book was the fact that he was talking about the different tax jurisdictions. but that's only because I know that with the other jurisdiction, I feel like every time he mentions something, it almost puts another area on my radar of, okay, if I wanted to leave the United States, that's where I'd invest for these reasons. And so also it's also interesting too, because so there's kind of a niche that I'm playing around with called excise taxes. And so you almost have to come up with all these crazy alternative ways to offset the excise tax. So like when he talks about separate states, that's fantastic because you can use that to offset the excise tax. Well, now I'm starting to wonder, okay, well, could I do that from a foreign standpoint as well, which is interesting because that's like a value add that you can add to a client. It's just like, okay, hey, I know the excise tax is killing you guys. You ever thought about investing in Mexico a little bit? Right. So it's I find it interesting for that reason. But yeah, that I just wanted to mention that.
That is a good perspective. It was interesting. I think it was the states where they got into, and I think that was chapter 3, but to listen through it. And I think Georgia, they said it was 50%. And in some states, like Michigan, I think was 0%, and others 6%. So it's like, okay, well, those are definitely states you don't want to do business in.
Yeah, no,
I always find it. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I always find it weird listening to Craig talk because he talks about all these businesses that open in different states and for different reasons. But something that kind of stood out to me, which I guess is kind of probably makes sense or seems logical, is the 7 categories are all things that we need for basic life, right? Everybody needs income, everybody needs a job, everybody needs research and development. Well, that enhances life in essence. And so it's just interesting to me to see how they kind of go through and define each of those 7 things and what's in there as far as what's covered as taxes or tax exemptions go. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting part. It was kind of, I think, the end of chapter 7 more than chapter 2 and 3, because chapter 2 and 3 start talking about each individual one. But I start getting lost when they start giving me my brain can't handle. I'm a high D. We can't handle that many details at one time.
He does get into some of the. I agree. And I think it's very beneficial. I do get lost. I kind of start thinking about some other things, some of the other topics that he may have brought up, because again, some of the specific percentages here and there. I mean, I kind of. Again, David, that's your responsibility to let me know what I'm doing. Okay, I'm selling goods. I have sales tax. Great. Here's the tax jurisdictions. To Laura's point, as far as I talk about multi-jurisdictional issues that are coming up, I'm looking at more usually on more on the legal side. And I'm trying to add some of the tax side to it, but I look at more of what are the legal reasons why people pick Delaware? Why are some of the legal, and this is all state, domestic, U.S. based. What are some of the reasons why people pick a Wyoming or a South Dakota or why Georgia if you're in situations? Most of those analysis that I'm looking at have always been traditionally, here's the legal side, and they always kick the can. Oh, don't forget, there's a tax side, just don't talk to me about it, right? I'll talk to David. But yeah, so I mean, I do get lost a little bit in the minutia of the 6% here, the 5% there, which one pays, 4 times R&D cost back and forth and stuff like that. But what I did like about, and in the ends of, shoot. Crap, I just lost my train of thought.
I have a thought
Yeah,
while you remember that. So one thing that this chapter also had me thinking about is what is it? So I have a lot of clients that a lot of the times just come to me and they already have contractors. And a few times I've been asked if they should convert them to employees. And so I've never really dived deep into like the employee retention credit. But I'm honestly starting to wonder now if like, I know in the past it's always just been like, beneficial and easier to have like contractors, but I know especially now since COVID, a lot more incentives have been coming around for, retaining your employees. And so now I'm like, honestly, I might start telling them convert them if you can. Like the cost goes up a little bit, but you can one deduct all of those costs and you still get a credit. So it's like now I'm starting to wonder if there's like a benefit analysis there, just as I was kind of reading through this chapter.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's definitely an interesting concept on it because, well, yeah, I think the ERC I think is only applicable for the 2021 year period. At least the one that you're talking about here on the radio. It's all over the place nowadays. It's only kept employees during the COVID
Right.
situations that they're trying to reward you for doing that. But there are I mean, there's lots of employment, and very similar. Past was before I looked at the tax aspect of having employees and what that means from it, and other things that kind of come out of the blue. Again, no one really planned for the ERC credit. All of a sudden, oh, by the way, you kept employees. Oh, here's some extra money back. You're looking
Right.
backwards. It wasn't like, hey, we're going to put this in so you keep them in the future. It was kind of the PPP loans were more of that.
Right.
And then there was some forgiveness on it. But the ERC was kind of a retroactive, I think, application, which is why everybody's still doing it now, 3 years after the event. But it's always been avoid, don't put them on a salary because you save your employment taxes. You don't have to pay all those. But you're losing potentially a lot more other tax benefits. Sure, you're going to pay this, you're going to pay this, but you're going to get X, Y, Z, and that much more. And I don't, that much more on the tax side. Whether there's IRS or whether there's state incentives, because the state incentives for having employees are also the same thing. They get a lot of tax breaks and things and incentives to do so on that side of it. So kind of it's not just a matter of paying your FICA taxes and Social Security taxes on your payroll, so that's coming off the top as an additional expense that you have to pay on the employer side, but you are getting a lot more on the back end of it, which is also really nice. Well, which is kind of, I just remember my thought too as we're talking about this. Was what I do like about his, though he gets into the weeds on it. I mean, I like the fact of that he kind of flips it around that says, okay, sure, you save 40 grand in taxes. Okay, so the IRS in essence gave you some rule and that you just save yourself $40,000 in taxes. Wow, phenomenal. Well, how does the IRS getting that and why are they doing it? Sure, now it falls in one of those 7 categories. So that's where the investment came from. It meets one of their 5 goals as far as why they give these tax breaks. But then it turns out, sure, they give you 40 grand, but you're actually going to pay them an extra 200,000 over the course of the next 10 years, right? So it's almost, they're investments not only in society, but it's an investment in getting more money. Instead of taking 40 grand today, the government will take 200 grand later or 400 grand later, because now that $40,000 investment turned into a capital asset that's worth $1 billion that gets sold. And sure, they're only taking 5% instead of 30%, but they'd rather have 5% of a billion than 5% of 40 grand.
Right.
So I did think, though, it was still in the weeds a little bit as far as the minutia of the numbers, but it did kind of like, wow, yeah, they're not giving up anything. Loophole, no. They're like, oh, we're parlaying this money into more money down the road and getting a benefit today.
It's an investment on them, for them.
Right.
So I thought that was kind of interesting as far as, again, the way he kind of flips the traditional thinking on taxes on all different aspects. I think that's really interesting, and it makes you, man, as I think I said earlier, takes the edge off taxes.
Right.
So,
I feel like Uncle Sam is just that guy that has really deep pockets but doesn't really want to work. It's all of the money he can get.
yeah. Now, did you guys feel the R&D side, was that mostly related to internal R&D? Did you guys get that as opposed to, because a lot of times I guess some of the earlier stuff was more investments of, here's types of investments. Invest in technology companies that are doing R and research and development, right? As opposed to investing in your own real research and development type situation. Does that make sense? So I feel like the 7 categories, invest in business, invest in technology and R&D. Well, that's the business is investing itself in the R&D, not as opposed to a third-party investment, which I thought the point of this book is, okay, now that we have all this money, what's the best way to invest money of our own dollars, if you will, and maximize and keep our own wealth and not pay any taxes for any ever. But it's also kind of a lot more stuff as far as running your own business that is doing this for itself.
So when I was thinking, or when I was listening to this chapter and he was kind of talking through research and development, I was kind of thinking through essentially any activity that kind of is for the purpose of bringing about doing something in a way it's not been done before. So like, for instance, if you're selling beverages or if you're selling food, anything related to, research cost on, finding ways to, source from a different, from a more clean source, or, reduce a cost, or anything that's going to kind of change your business, I guess, so that the product is either better or different from anything else. To me, I almost kind of see that as the research and development. And so you can kind of take that across multiple different fields. So like for technology, you're going to build a new app. Well, all of the research and development as far as building that app, researching how to do it and putting the architecture together, all of that's going to be research and development. Same thing with the food, any of those testing fees, scientific fees, farming related, anything like that. As long as you can prove it's going towards the betterment of the product or service, or, something that's not been created before that solves a new issue. That's kind of what I look at the research and development, because when you start thinking through like pharmacy and some other ones that are easy to think through, that's exactly what they're doing. Right? They're paying scientists, they're paying a lab, they're paying all those types of things to figure out how can we get this new medication to do this, fix this whatever problem.
Yeah, well, I looked at it like, I think either way, I think if you're investing in a research and development company, I bet there's tax dollars that are tax deferred, or you can alleviate the taxes, because he talks a lot about Elon Musk in this chapter and about going to the moon or going to outer space. And while I don't think that's, a benefit to everybody, right? Only the people that are rich can go to the moon or to space or whatever. But it feels like he's talking about anything that is research and development for the betterment of human society. And I would branch out and step out on a limb that's probably pretty weak and say that the definition of betterment to society for government tax breaks is loosely defined, because I don't know that Elon Musk and his SpaceX really does much for anyone unless they're in, the top 1% and can afford that. But knowing that he used that as an example, my assumption is that, the tax breaks are there for anybody doing research and development for the betterment of society. I'm sure if you were researching and developing how to make a better cocaine, you probably would not get a tax break.
Well, you probably just talk about it's not. I'm not better cocaine, but I'm making a better painkiller that hospitals could use that just happen to be based on cocaine.
I mean, they use morphine, so I guess it's the same thing.
On how you sell it.
Oxycontin, right? It's just morphine, right? I mean, it takes a bunch of opium and figure out, let's take some opium that's illegal and make it legal.
Right. So I think you probably get the tax break on either side of that fence, whether you're just investing or, because I think you get tax breaks if you invest in businesses. So I would assume you don't have to run the business. right?
Yeah.
You just invest in them. And so I would assume that it's on both sides of the fence.
I could kind of relate to the R&D with some of my historical careers and engineering side of and development and working with the different companies. And I kind of wondered if I hope they had some good accountants that knew that, that effort that we were doing to improve our processes and creating tools and getting more creative, they were taking advantage of that additional research and getting those tax credits from it. But when I was part of those developments, never even crossed my mind, and nobody ever talked about what we could save from this, but they made us report it. So I think somebody knew what they were doing, hopefully.
If anybody, kind of along with David's question or comment that he's thinking the software development, right? When it talks to reinvesting in our own particular fields, right? So I think one of the advantages of investing in R&D and stuff like that is for your own business is that you're getting it. For me, I was thinking, well, what kind of R&D does a lawyer need? I mean, I'm not creating a new casebook. I mean, as far as that goes, they're already there, they're already existing, they're digitally and whatnot. But I guess when I think about it, okay, well, I can invest money in developing a software that allows for automation of my, let's say, estate planning intake questions, right? Where it becomes more of an AI. And as I say that, I see emails coming in about ChatGPT and the implications in the legal world, right? But the kind of that same thing, kind of an AI-based software that instead of me spending, an hour talking with the client and getting basic information that they're very comfortable asking. What's your name? What's your date of birth? What's your address? Who are your kids? All that information, to have software that really kind of takes that and automates it into a system will be an R&D development for me as an attorney that has some estate planning practices. I guess I think Natalie and Laura, you guys are both on the real estate. Anything that if you were actually investing in any, I know I'm not putting everybody on the spot, but and man, this would be really great if I can invent this for my practice, for my area. Any kind of R&D stuff that you guys think about?
So to your point, I have a couple of internal softwares that I've been working on. And I kind of picked that up that seems to be a trend for very large businesses. Generally they'll kind of have so with the exception of software companies, a lot of companies that aren't related to software will have their own, and they'll have multiple of their own. Whoops. And so
4, 5, 6. Next week. Less than a minute left.
Oh shit.
We have 20 seconds left, so I would say you probably need to tell us what chapters to read.
Software.
4, 5, 6.
4, 6.
Chapter 4 is on real estate, so that should be interesting.
Oh, that's exciting.
It is.
Sweet.
I hope everybody enjoyed the first 3 chapters.
I did.
Great job, Craig.